a half hour of Q&A. So let's just get started. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to have about a half hour presentation or so from Damacio Lopez, who's got 37 years of researching depleted uranium weapons and related issues. And then we're going to have another 30 or 40 minutes wide open Q&A and discussion. So all those related topics can be raised. And with no further ado, I'm actually going to invite Damacio Lopez to say a little bit about himself and his own history before he gets started on his presentation. Welcome, Damacio.
Thank you. The way I got involved in this is that I had been away for a long time from my hometown. I had been working as a golf professional in another state, and I'd been gone for quite a few years. And when I came back to Socorro, when I came back to Socorro in 1985, there was some huge explosions that were taking place less than 2 miles from my house on the Socorro Mountain. It's the prevailing winds come from that direction, and our drinking water in Socorro comes from that mountain as well. We have a lot of wells out there that come into the community. And when I discovered, unbeknownst to the people in Socorro, that depleted uranium was being tested right next door to them on top of their water supply. And I found out that they had been doing this since 1973, right? Unbeknownst to the people in the community. And they had been testing this weapons there since 1973. And then 1985, I started investigating this and found out that, in fact, they had been testing weapons made out of uranium. They called it depleted uranium. And shortly after I learned this, I talked to the officials at New Mexico Tech, New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, because they were the people who promoted this, and it was one of their divisions called TERA, T-E-R-A, Terminal Effects Research and Analysis Group. They were the people that began in 1973. But they had actually begun earlier than that. In 1949, they had begun to do tests on trying to figure out how to use these bullets and develop them. They did a lot of developing of the weapon, along with Los Alamos National Laboratories and the outfit in Albuquerque, the Sandia National Laboratories, so they had done a lot of work by the time they finally started testing the weapon in 1973. And not only did they start using or testing the weapon, there were other states and other facilities across the United States that were testing these weapons at the same period of time. Does anybody have that map of those facilities? Can we get that on the screen?
Yeah, let me get that on the screen.
Okay. So these facilities that you're going to see now are depleted uranium testing and manufacturing facilities across the United States. As you can see by this map, they're all over the place. And it's no wonder that they say that this depleted uranium won't go more than a few hundred meters from the site of where it was used and where it disintegrated into nano-sized particles. As you can see by this map, it seems like we pretty much saturated the country. And this is part of this particular map is a map that came out of a book called Uranium Battlefields at Home and Abroad, the Use of Depleted Uranium by the U.S. Department of Defense. I was one of the authors of that book. And I located a lot of these sites. It took a long time. So anyway, that was kind of the starting point for me. When I found out that they were testing them there at New Mexico Tech, I approached the officials there, the president of the school, and I told him I want to know what was happening there. My family, my mother particularly, was very upset about these explosions, because they would knock the china off the closets and the cupboards and they would break. And this was really disturbing. And these explosions they'd have 10, 12 a day, maybe even more. Huge explosions. They cracked the walls, the adobe walls of the people there in the town. And the people were just didn't know what was going on. And then I found out that it was depleted uranium. And I went ahead and what I did was I went to a Board of Regents meeting at New Mexico Tech. That was the first thing I did. And I asked them, what are you testing on this mountain, and how long do you plan to do this? They were very evasive on the answers. They said, "Oh, we're just testing regular explosives like we have since 1949, and some special projects for the military that we do for them." And they didn't say any more than that. And so I went home after I was at this Regents meeting, went back to my mom, and I said, "Mom," I said, "I don't think there's a problem." I said, "It's just regular explosives." And they told me that, this is not going to go on forever. Sometimes they're a little loud, but they're not going to, it's not going to be a problem according to them. And I was a professional golfer at the time, and I had come home for Christmas. And this was back in November and December of 1985. And so I asked this president of this school, or the regents, what was going on. And like I said, they were pretty evasive about their answers. 4 days later, the newspaper, El Defensor Chieftain, had covered that meeting. And they did an article on it. And they did a response as well, what their position was. And about 4 days after this came out in the newspaper, I stepped out of my house one morning, about 4 days later, and I saw about 5 fairly large boxes sitting on my front lawn. And I thought, whoa, somebody brought their garbage out to my house. So I went over and opened the boxes. They were very neatly packed. And I opened a box and I started looking at it, and I was so surprised. It was well, let me put it this way. The information in there was about the entire history of the testing of depleted uranium at New Mexico Tech. Why they tested it, who they tested it for, what were the health and environmental consequences of testing in the town, what other facilities across the United States did this. As you can see, I have this map over here. I got that information from these boxes. And there was a lot of things in these boxes. And I knew a little bit about radiation from the Trinity blast and the subsequent problems that people had that lived near the Trinity blast. That was pretty much the only thing I knew about radiation. And so this was a new thing to me. And after getting this information, I went to the president of the school. I called him and asked him for an appointment. I told him I had some information that I'd like to talk to him about. And we made an appointment. The next day I showed up out to his office. I brought, he was really, like real helpful and real polite, and, shook my hand, and everything seemed to be fine. He had seen me at the Board of Regents meeting, and I knew who he was too. And I said to him, I said, I've got some documents here. I think you ought to take a look at them. It has to do with the answers that the regents gave me when I was there. And I have these documents. I had specific documents that I wanted to show him. There was about 4 or 5 of them. And there was a lot of documents that I had besides that, but I picked out the ones that I thought would be important. One said, and this was primary data. This wasn't, secondhand information. It came, actually, those boxes came from the director of Terra, who had been the director for decades. He was one of the people that helped develop this weapon. He had gotten brain cancer, and the school released him. He wasn't there no more. Let him go. And I guess he might have got a little upset and put all these documents into these boxes. And with all this information, I picked out like 3 or 4. I didn't look at all of them. Obviously, I opened about 1 or couple of boxes and looked at stuff. It was pretty difficult to understand. I didn't know too much about radiation, and so I asked him. I took one document that said that the testing had begun in 1973 of these weapons, and another document explained the health and environmental hazards of the testing of depleted uranium and what it did to people. Pretty much what I found in Iraq. And I showed him this documents, and his smile and good nature turned into something very different. His face turned totally white. Remember, they had been doing this for quite a few years, this testing. Nobody knew about it. They kept it a secret. The people that knew were the congressmen, the state representatives, the mayor of the town, the county commissioner. They kept that thing mum. And no one in town knew that these things were happening. His face turned white looking at this stuff. And then he said to me, I asked him, I said, what's this depleted uranium all about? I said, I don't know what it is, except other than what it says here in these documents. And he looked at me and he said, boy, don't you understand English? It's depleted of uranium. You should go to school and learn English. Well, I had racial insults growing up as a young boy, and I thought those days were over. Obviously not. I didn't say anything to him. I just looked I couldn't believe what he was telling me. This is the president of the school. And I was showing him information that I had and wanted some answers. The only answer he gave me was what I've just said. And I was kind of in awe that he would react this way. He's the president of this university. I got him
Please mute yourselves. Thank you, Bill.
I went home on my bicycle thinking about what he had said and what had happened with that meeting I had with him. And I was quite disturbed because I was getting ready to go back to Yuma, Arizona, where I had been a golf professional for 15 years. I was home on vacation. And I saw the attitude that he had, and then the documents, they led me to believe that I needed to do something about this. I had to do something. I had all that information. I put together a group called Save Our Mountain there in Socorro. There was about 15 people in that group. A couple of them were lawyers, and others were university. One was a university professor. So there were very well qualified people that could understand these documents. And so we started going through the documents, and then we began a campaign to advise the people in the community what was going on. And they were in shock. It was hard for them. They couldn't believe it. But with the documents that I had, there was no getting around it. Some of those documents had ink on them. They weren't all copies. And it went, like I said earlier, it went back to 1949 when they began the development of these weapons, along with some other facilities, and showed these, what you see on the screen, all those different facilities. Not only those facilities, I learned what they were testing at those facilities. I learned what they were manufacturing, what kind of weapons, and the defense contractors that a lot of these are defense contractors that you see here. They're not all military installations. And it became a problem for me. It seemed like the people that were doing this testing felt like they had been somehow caught. And I personally, I'm not going to go into it, but I had a threat. I had threats on my life. And not only did I have a threat, but one day one evening I was with some friends at the local bar, the Capitol Bar there in Socorro, having a beer, and I had talked to a lawyer, one of our lawyers in Save Our Mountain. She told me, it was she told me, said, people like this president don't say things like this unless they mean it. So you better be careful. And she said, well, make sure you're around people and you're not going anywhere by yourself, especially at night. So it started to get dark, and I was in this bar and with some friends, and I said, I better leave now. Went home on my bike, and about 2 blocks from my house, everything turned black. Several hours later, I opened my eyes and I was in the hospital, Socorro General Hospital. My head was swelled up like a basketball, had a broken collarbone. I had sores throughout my body. I was found alongside a ditch, unconscious. And so, that was kind of my introduction to the people I was going to be dealing with. So thus began my attempt to ban these weapons. I was thinking mostly banning them in Socorro. I wasn't thinking about a global ban to ban a global campaign to ban the weapons. I was just thinking about Socorro because of what happened to me. Eventually, when I left the hospital, I went and I stayed with some friends, stayed away from that town. I was afraid for my life. And after about 3 months, I started feeling a little bit better. But during that time, I had like explosions. I felt like explosions were going off in my head. I had some serious head injuries. And it was a pretty depressing part of my life. I always felt, like somebody was trying to kill me, basically. And, one doesn't have it's kind of an uneasy feeling. So I stayed away from there for 3 months. And when I came back to Socorro, after I felt a little better, I went, of course, to my parents' house, my mom. And the first thing my mother told me was, Junior, you need to stop what you're doing. You're causing us a lot of problems here. And my dad, who I really respected and is a wonderful man and smart, he said, yeah, Junior, you should be careful. You should stop what you're doing. And here I was, my body broken practically, and my own parents denouncing me. I went looking for the Save Our Mountain people. They had scattered. They were afraid. So that was a start. That's and so for all of this time, I've been researching this subject and trying to get accurate information that so that I might at some point be in a position to help ban these weapons at a global level. I should tell you, at one point while I was going after I got my strength back and started going back to studying, I went to the University of New Mexico, and then I had a chance to look over those documents and take courses in physics and research methods and English, because like the president of the school told me, he said I had to learn English, so I took some advanced courses in English. So and they helped me quite a bit. The Save Our Mountain group was, some of them came back together, and we had an interesting visitor come to visit us from Los Lunas, New Mexico. His name was Jerry Wheat. Let me tell you a little bit about Jerry. He was one of these soldiers that was injured. One of the injured soldiers from depleted uranium in the Persian Gulf War, and he came to tell us about his experience. He had been the Persian Gulf War lasted from January 17th, 1991 to February 28th, 1991. About a month and a half. And there were 219 U.S. casualties during that time. $154 were killed in battle, and 65 died as a result of non-battle causes. So we got like 219 people. So how did they get killed? Well, the Gulf War casualties, the deaths, 35 of them were killed, and 72 were wounded, resulting from friendly fire involving crews of armored vehicles struck by depleted uranium. This Los Lunas visitor named Jerry Wheat came to Socorro to speak to our veterans there and to the community about what he had gone through. He lived to tell of his experience. He was wounded by friendly fire on February 27th, 1990, as he was driving a Bradley armored personnel carrier. He did not know at the time that he had been hit by DU. He said he was knocked unconscious by the first of two shells, and when he came to his and his clothing caught fire, he said the skin on his neck and lower back was burning from the DU shrapnel in his body. He was awarded a Purple Heart. He returned with the pieces of DU shrapnel embedded in his body. Jerry Wheat says he has had bad joint pains, abdominal problems, headaches. He went from 220 pounds to 160. VA told him he was suffering from post-traumatic stress. Jerry at the time was married, had 3 children. I got to meet him there in Los Lunas. And that was a very long time ago. I tried to contact him recently and was unable to find him. He ended up moving to the East Mountains here in Albuquerque. He lost his job eventually. He worked at the post office. He got a divorce, left his house in Los Lunas, and moved into a home in the East Mountains, where he lives today. And he's pretty much out of contact. It's hard to find him. I've been trying to get a hold of him lately, and I can't locate him anymore. So I got some we got information directly from somebody that was involved in there. It wasn't just somebody that wrote something or figured something out mathematically or something. This was a real person that experienced all these things that happened to him, and he told us about them. So there we are. Then we were, of course, in the town we're very concerned about our water supply and what might happen there. Well, on October 2006, Socorro's worst nightmare became a reality. The New Mexico Environment Department issued a notice of violation of the New Mexico drinking water regulations to the Socorro water system. Socorro's drinking water was found to be contaminated with high levels of uranium. The utilities director of Socorro said the uranium in the water is naturally occurring and is not depleted uranium. He said that the uranium levels have always been the same. It's just that the EPA changed the limits. So I think it's probably time to tell you just what this depleted uranium is. Du is a pyrophoric metal. Thus, when a projectile made of Du strikes a heavily armored tank, the force of impact causes the Du to ignite and burn at such intense temperatures that the projectile literally melts its way through the armor, melting the armor as well. Once inside the tank, the burning metal typically ignites fuel or armaments and creates a secondary explosion. That destroys the tank and kills the crew. Du ignites spontaneously at temperatures of 600 to 700 degrees Celsius. When a Du penetrator strikes a hard target, it results in temperatures of more than 1200 degrees Celsius. In the process of this conflagration, submicroscopic particles of uranium oxide ceramics are produced, creating an aerosol of radioactive particles that are in the nanosize To give you an example, what that means, what is a nanosized particle? Nanosized particles are 1,000 times smaller than a speck of dust and go wherever the wind takes them. They can also be obviously easily inhaled. They're like a gas. And how much of the, well, they eventually land on soil and can easily be suspended unless they settle in watersheds. So that's kind of like what happens with this. Studies have shown that between 10% and 75% of the Du in the penetrator can be converted to this minute particles. Particles smaller than 5 microns can become permanently lodged deep within the lungs when inhaled. Actually, the nanoparticles are smaller than the let's see. They're smaller than microns in diameter, the nanoparticles. Like I said, anyway, these can become permanently lodged deep in the lungs when inhaled. And because these uranium oxides have very low solubility, they remain in the body for decades. Unfortunately, if the past is any guide, local civilian populations are unlikely to be warned when Du weapons are used, even if Du contaminates their food or water supply. Prior to the Gulf War, the U.S. Army was aware of the potential for DU contamination to cause health problems among civilian populations. Yet the Department of Defense did nothing to warn the inhabitants of Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq about DU contamination of their air, soil, and water. Rather, U.S. Army reports express more concern about public outcry and future restrictions on the use of DU weapons than about contaminating lands at home and abroad and poisoning soldiers and civilians. This was my start in all of this. I can tell you how, how this, the historical perspective on the first use of depleted uranium, but I don't think we need to get into that unless you really want to know about it. But a lot of studies were done prior to this. Like, for instance, in 1943, the U.S. War Department proposed a research into the use of radioactive material as a military weapon to General L.R. Grove, who headed the Manhattan Project in Los Alamos, New Mexico. One of the possible military uses of radioactive material against enemy personnel would be as a gas warfare agent. The material would be ground into particles of microscopic size and would be distributed in the form of dust or smoke by ground fire projectiles, land vehicles, airplanes, or aerial bombs. In this form, it would be inhaled by personnel. It could also be developed in liquid. In 1990, the U.S. Army Foreign Service and Technology Center warned of the possibility that conventional explosives could be used by threat force to disseminate radioactive materials from reactor waste or radium and radioactive isotopes of cesium and cobalt from therapeutic sources on the battlefield. So this was the beginning of their research, and since that time they continued doing the research, and in 1947 they came to Socorro and continued their research and development and testing. And to this day, they're testing them there today. Probably, I'm in Bernalillo, New Mexico. I left there a long time ago when I realized the danger I was in.
Excuse me, Damacio. Just want to do a quick, excuse me very much. This is
Sure.
like really fascinating and very informative, but I wanted to do a quick time check for all of us. So,
Sure. Okay.
so we've been speaking for a little over a half hour. So I know you have a lot more to share. I would suggest maybe 10 or 15 more minutes so that we can get into Q&A and discussion. Would that work for you?
Maybe even less than that.
Okay, great.
Give me a second here and let me look at what that information might look like. Well, you know what? Let's go ahead and get into the questions and answers. I'd feel a lot better about if I did it that way.
Terrific. Okay, first hand up, Willard Hunter. You want to unmute yourself, Willard? There you go.
Damacio, it's good to hear you again.
Thank you, Willard.
You presented to our VFP chapter in Albuquerque recently. Anyway, my question deals with what the city official said was naturally occurring uranium. It seems like they should be able to differentiate between naturally occurring uranium and depleted uranium. Did that issue ever come up?
Yeah, I brought it up several times, and they did an extensive report on the uranium in that mountain and how that uranium was contributing to the contamination. And it was a long, drawn out report. However, the testing sites are where our drinking water comes from, and this was obviously seeping into the water table.
Is it possible that the uranium contamination came from natural sources that were activated somehow by the by the explosions rather than from depleted uranium?
I don't see how that could have happened. Actually, there was about 2 years before they sent this violation of our drinking water there in Socorro. I had been appointed the environmental. I had a job, environmental chairman of the Environmental Awareness Committee of Socorro and Socorro County, Socorro City and Socorro County, and I had made a request in that position to have a testing of to test the site for contamination of depleted uranium. I had asked for this. It was a formal request. I was an official from the city and county of Socorro, and the Environment Department went ahead and accepted it. Governor Carruthers was the governor at that time, and they did the test in the Socorro Mountains, and they found that the testing sites were all contaminated. So then they checked the water sources, some on at the golf course there in Socorro, which is at the base of the Socorro Mountain, near the base, and they found contamination levels in the water they were using on the golf course.
Okay, I got a couple more hands up here.
Okay.
Nancy Price and Jim Wolgamuth. Nancy, go ahead, unmute yourself, please.
Thank you. Mr. Lopez, I'm so glad to hear this because I first heard you speak in 1996 at the founding convention of the Alliance for Democracy, when you spoke about this and laid out what from this talk was sort of the first half of your talk in 1996.
Yeah.
So we see from this case, and also the case of the contamination of water with firefighting foam and the PFAS forever chemicals, how the Department of Defense in every instance has just turned the other way and led people, and impacted public health in such serious manners. So I'm very grateful to hear you, and hope that we can certainly bring this topic to bear now with depleted uranium weapons being introduced into Ukraine. It's the time to really lift this topic up. Thank you so much.
Well, this is exactly what I figured, when as I said, I was writing this book and all of a sudden I stop and reduce that book to 24 pages. Now I found a writer, a really good writer that's reducing it to even less pages, probably 3 or 4. And this kind of information would probably go directly to people like the president of Ukraine, which is my intent. And that's taking place right now. And another thing that's taking place is a global call to action. And with the things that are happening in the Ukraine, I think it's an appropriate thing to do right now. And I'm hoping that the organization will help me with this. The ICBUW, International Coalition to Ban Uranium Weapons, is one of the top groups in the world that deal with this issue. And in fact, I have a meeting with them next week, a Zoom meeting, to discuss this global call to action, and also what we're going to do about the situation in the Ukraine now that we know for sure that depleted uranium is being sent there and with the intent to use it. And from my understanding, they already have begun.
Jim Wolgamuth?
So thanks, Jerry. So Damacio, a couple of things. You just touched on Ukrainian. Couldn't the Russians consider this quite an escalation on our part? And then your 3-page document, can people get it? And third, then how do they follow you, or how do they get in touch with you? Where should they go to try and help your cause? So that's 3 things: Ukraine, the document, and how can people help?
Okay. First of all, I'm really excited about this global call to action. I don't know if you can see much of it right there, but I think it's backwards there, the letters. Anyway, what people can do is take this global call to action and follow some of the information that's on here. It's just going to be a one page, and it's going to ask you to contact these people.
So those are the people in the UN, the members of the Security Council.
That's correct. They're the ones that have the power to ban these weapons. Up to now, some of my colleagues that, like ICBUW and others, and have worked with the subcommissions on subcommission on human rights and other subcommissions, and they've put together a resolution to ban these weapons. And this resolution has gone to this Security Council members 2 or 3, I don't know how many times, I lost count. They reject it every time. Any one of these 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council, can just say, no, we're not gonna have a hearing on this, and they do that. I think they've done that 2 or 3 times. And these people that I'm talking about are China, the representative from China, France, the Russian Federation, United Kingdom, and the United States. And it's no coincidence.
These members that are rejecting it, is it primarily the U.S. or is it China and Russia too? Or
well, China and Russia, to their convenience, right now they like to attack the United States. Because they know that we're sending them in and we're going to use it. There also has been surveys done by a demining group in here it is, in Ukraine Ordnance Guide, Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, Explosive Ordnance Guide for Ukraine. In this guide, they talk about DU being fired from Russian tanks.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing it. I don't know.
I get it.
I don't know to what extent, but these people here found projectiles out in the battlefield in Ukraine and identified it as Russian-made depleted uranium projectiles.
I'm going to call on myself for a second to comment on that because I guess it was the UK, the United Kingdom, that first announced they're going to send depleted uranium weapons into Ukraine. And yes, Russia does consider that to be an escalation, Jim. And as a matter of fact, Russia's President Putin responded directly to that, saying that the introduction of depleted uranium weapons would be the introduction of nuclear weapons into, and of course they are different, significantly different, but that was his response. And then more recently, he's, I believe also President Putin has had in a press conference last week, let the world know that Russia also has depleted uranium weapons. And so kind of implicitly said, if they're introduced and used, we could do the same. So anyway, it does lend itself to an escalation, which is exactly what we don't need in Ukraine, right? Veterans for Peace is calling for a ceasefire and negotiations to end that war, and we don't see any military solution whatsoever, only further disaster. But so this is just one more example of how this war could escalate and get out of control. So just that's my statement. And then aside from that, Damacio, I had another question, and that is, how widespread, as far as you know, how widespread is the possession and use of depleted uranium weapons? Maybe you already said which countries hold them, but I'd like to get clear on that. And then Ken,
Sure.
will call on you next.
Okay, I have a list of the countries 20 years ago that were doing this. I don't know what the current situation is and what exactly how many countries or which countries they are, but I can tell you what was going on back in 1992. Let's see. U.S. legislation 1992 made it permissible to sell M633s or comparable anti-tank shells containing DU penetrators to these NATO countries: Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Iceland, Italy, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Turkey, and the United Kingdom. Major non-NATO allies included were Australia, Egypt, Israel, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. So they've proliferated these weapons. And in terms of who are the major developers and manufacturers and the people making the money off of this, it is the United States, France, China, Russia, and the United Kingdom.
Okay.
They're the people.
Those are the members of the Security Council, aren't they?
They're the permanent members of the Security Council.
And the reason they're on the Security Council is because at the time they were the 5 countries that possessed nuclear weapons.
Well, it has something to do with that. After World War II, they made an arrangement where these countries would have this kind of power, and they've abused it.
Right. So Ken Mayers has had his hand up for a while.
Let's see, am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes.
Well, first, just a quick comment. Yeah, Putin announced recently that depleted uranium weapons are currently being shipped to Belarus. So we know that that's a clear response to our agreeing to
Poland, right?
No, to Belarus.
Okay, that's another country. Okay.
Yeah.
I heard that they had been sent to Poland as well.
Yeah, well, the U.S. is sending them to Poland, and the Russians are sending them to Belarus. So
Okay.
that kind of tit for tat there. But I was wondering, Damacio,
Ken, that's separate from the tactical nuclear weapons that are being shipped to Belarus.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But my question was whether there have been some epidemiological studies of the medical effects, the health effects of DU in some of these cities on the map you showed us where they're being tested.
Okay. I have some documents here. As you can see, there's quite a few. These are documents that were put out by the military and their contractors. It talks about the hazards of depleted uranium. It talks about the hazards to plants, hazards to the soil, and people, of course. And there's a lot of them. You know, these are just a few of the documents that are available. And this is some of the stuff that I got out of those 5 boxes that were left in my lawn. It's very clear to me that these are dual-use weapons. When that projectile hits the tank, it kills. Well, it didn't with the American soldiers. It didn't kill all the soldiers all the time. And the reason it didn't was because those Abrams tanks had some kind of a system where they sucked the air out of the tank when they were hit, and getting the radiation and the particles out of the tank. And also, I should say that when a projectile goes into that tank, it superheats the inside of the tank, and when it does this, it will blow up in most cases, it'll blow up the armament in the tank, which is overhead, and so they were able to escape. You know, they weren't all killed. There was only 30. That's not only, there was 30 of our troops were killed in these tanks by friendly fire, and 70 of them were able to get out with just shrapnel in their body. And I might say that the people that went to, like Jerry Wheat, that went to the military and the VA asking for help with the shrapnel in their body, they wanted to have it taken out. They wouldn't do it. But they made a lot of appointments for Jerry to come in periodically so they could check him out and see how he was doing, just like a guinea pig. Finally, Jerry went to his dad, or his dad found a doctor, and they went ahead and they took out some of the shrapnel out of his body. And when he came to Socorro, he had a little bag full of shrapnel that had come out, just not very much, maybe 10 or 12 pieces that had come out of his body. And I had a radiation detector. I have a very good one that I've used for quite a while. And the level of radiation was something like 7 times higher than background. And this is a shrapnel that came out of his body.
Peter Aronson, are you wanting to speak?
Yes, a couple things. One, the Abrams tank, the M1 Abrams tank uses DU armor. So when non-DU firing weapons like Russian tanks fire, they don't go through. They mushroom like a typical munition does. That's one thing. Another is in terms of the escalation in Ukraine. Again, by Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Department of Homeland Security define a dirty bomb as a radiologic agent. Any form of uranium is a radiologic agent dispersed by a conventional explosive. The US Navy defines a poison, what a poison is, which is forbidden from all kinds of past treaties. And DU fits both of those definitions. So one can assume there's going to be some escalation. The other thing in my mind has to do with soldiers going in. In case of Gulf War I and Gulf War II, it was required if you had a level 1 or level 2 exposure. And Damacio, your example way back was a level 1 exposure. Somebody had shrapnel in them. Level 2, people that go into equipment that was hit by DU, as a level 2 exposure. Those are required to be tested. A level 3 is everything else. If you're in country, downwind, that's a level 3 exposure. If you ask to be tested, it's required that you be tested. That's for US soldiers. Here's my point. There's only one US testing in the United States. That's in Baltimore, the Baltimore VA. They use a testing method, I don't know now, this is some years ago now, that could not do like DU has an isotopic signature. When you see that signature, you know it's depleted uranium. It's not natural uranium. It's not U-235 or some of the hot stuff. And the UK 20 years ago used a testing method that could detect DU separated from background radiation and everything else 20 years after exposure. The US testing method tests only urine, and they must be submitted within 180 days of exposure, and it cannot distinguish background radiation from DU. That's what they already say. So we're up against a lot of uphill issues with the military because it's such a small number of people that have actually been tested, and everybody is required to get pre-deployment DU safety training. How could you get exposed? How do you avoid it? Blah, blah, blah. And almost none have gotten that. So this point is about information is not necessarily classified, but they can say with the lack of testing that as far as we know, DU is safe. Mm-hmm. And, it's an alpha emitter. and alpha doesn't go through this, but in 1 month, it's also producing beta and gamma. And so it's,
Okay, thanks, Peter.
it's
That's a lot
pretty
of
terrible stuff. I'm going to let that go at that. Thank you.
that's a lot of that's a lot of helpful information. We should stay in touch. Damacio wanted to respond, and then I got a couple of people with their hands up.
Yeah, you know, those tests that you're talking about that they were doing on the soldiers,
Mhm.
they found something very interesting in some of those tests. Not all of them, but some. They found uranium-236 in some of these soldiers. Well, they've been telling us, the nuclear industry and the government and the military, that this is uranium that's
Doesn't exist in nature.
well, it's U-236 doesn't exist in nature. It comes from a nuclear reactor.
Mhm.
So what does this tell people? When I was in Iraq, I had my radiation detector. I was a member of the Citizens Advisory Board for the Department of Energy here in New Mexico. And before I went to Iraq, I took my radiation detector into the laboratory there at Sandia, and I asked them to check it out. And then what I wanted to know was, at what point am I dealing with depleted uranium? How many counts per minute? And it turned out that it was 600 counts per minute, and particularly with my instrument that I was using, they calculated that. And I actually did some tests with depleted uranium that they had at the facility. And it came out to 600 counts per minute, tops, for depleted uranium. I mean, if I find a projectile intact, I put the handheld radiation detector with next to the projectile, maybe an inch or two from it. I should get 600 counts per minute.
Mhm.
Okay. On the highway of death, what happened there? Let me tell you. I found projectiles laying on the ground out there. And of course, there was the holes in the tanks and all of this sort of stuff. My radiation detector was reading 240. Let's see.
It was hot.
It was hot. It was I want to say let's see, what was it? Oh yes, it was 2,400 counts per minute.
Wow.
And well, I'm out there in the field with this radiation detector, and all of a sudden I'm looking at something a lot hotter than depleted uranium, and I'm wondering about my own health.
Yeah,
Well,
and that's years after the explosion, right?
Right. This stuff's got a half-life of 4.5 billion years.
Okay, I've got two hands up. Don Kimball, then I'm going to invite Dan Shea if he wishes to comment about how the military and the VA dealt with Agent Orange and the ongoing impacts there, because I think there might be some parallels here
Sure.
we would want to look at. Don, go ahead. Unmute yourself, brother. Thank you.
All right, I want to make sure everybody sees the Golden Rule t-shirt here. And because tomorrow Sunday we get the Golden Rule, so we're so looking forward to Jerry and Helen coming. Damacio, thank you for your work. We go back to the 90s working together on this issue and stuff. And, it's great to see you at the forefront. And I'm glad your health is good enough so you can continue this mission, because, Damacio is a very humble person, and, he hasn't told us that he actually had level 1 exposure, I think, as Peter, is it Aronson, had talked about. Damacio has experienced that from being over in Iraq. Damacio, 2 questions, both dealing with the health. So the PACT Act just passed, about a year ago or so. Is the PACT Act covering veterans who claim damage from DU, whether they got it through their skin, whether they inhaled it or ingested it? And 2, in your opinion, is Gulf War syndrome a result of depleted uranium exposure? Thank you.
I'll answer the second question first. Yes, all of my studies and all of these studies here, that's what they say. and that those symptoms that these soldiers had came from depleted uranium. The other question was, what was the first one again?
Is it covered by the PACT Act?
Yeah, I read that PACT Act, wondering about the same thing, and it talked about exposure to radiation and also burn sites. I learned at one point that some of these burn sites, they were burning depleted uranium.
Wow.
And a lot.
Dan Shea, do you have anything to add?
Well, yeah, I think Ken tried to raise some of that question, talking about the health of veterans and stuff. One of the things that, I'm a Agent Orange exposed veteran from Vietnam War, 1968, in Quang Tri province. And the war and when the war ended, that was not the end of the war for me. And my son was born in 1971, and in 1981 had to go for heart surgery. He was born with congenital heart disease, cleft palate, and some other abnormalities. And at the time, I barely knew about Agent Orange, but immediately began to start understanding the effects of it. And when my son went to have surgery, he went for 10 hours in surgery. There was an oxygen shock to the brain, and he ended up in a coma for 7 weeks and eventually took his last breath in my arms. And that was, my whole life had changed. Well, we're talking about veterans here a lot of times, but we're not. I immediately thought, my grief was so horrendous, was the grief of the Vietnamese people and how many millions suffered from the similar things that I had gone through. And the children, I've been back twice to Vietnam and seeing the results of Agent Orange today, with children being born, and even in the third and maybe fourth generation with birth defects of many different kinds. Well, I'm hearing the same thing coming from Iraq and Afghan veterans, from depleted uranium and burn pit, on whatever those chemicals were. They're toxic chemicals, no matter how you look at it. And the VA kept postponing benefits to us for years and years. And still, I'm still fighting for some issues. The PAC Act opened up some doors for all of us, except, as you said, there's testing. You got to prove that you were exposed to it. Then how do you prove that you have it? There's a presumption to a certain degree, but then you're already suffering from the effects of these things. And now maybe you'll get healthcare benefits, maybe you get some disability. But you're still in this action of trying to pay for this stuff at the same time that Congress is trying to privatize the VA system. And so they're trying to turn all this stuff away, so they keep cutting costs for people. That's why they keep refusing us. Now, many veterans, there's another sector of children of Vietnam veterans. Their parents have already died, usually if it's a male veteran. They don't recognize the children from there. They do with the women, but they do not recognize it from male veterans, although they suffer the same things. And so why would that be? There were less women that were in Vietnam at that time, so they can afford to pay a certain amount. But plenty of Vietnam veterans, and that's a lot more money to talk about. So I think we have to look at that. I would be interested in what kind of data they have of the birth defects and illnesses that have been recorded from this. And I think some of the problem is they're not recording it. And the only way we will know is how many people begin to claim these depleted uranium and burn pit exposure through the VA. And we need to keep track on that. That's all I can offer right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Alice, I see you, but I'm going to let Damacio respond if he wishes first.
Well, I didn't study the problem in Vietnam quite as much as I should have, but what I was looking at with the Agent Orange was how long it took before they finally acknowledged that it was a problem, and I think it had a lot to do with paying off people. giving them compensation for their illnesses. Well, if they wait long enough, people will die and they won't have to pay them anything. And I think that I think that's a big consideration that the military has right now when it comes to depleted uranium soldiers who are sick today. They don't too much money.
Alice Slater, you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I wanted to tell you about this book that was written in 1995, I think, by Ramsey Clark, Metal of Dishonor, and it was about depleted uranium, and it has studies. I happened to do a chapter in there, and I posted it to this list. I don't know if you saw it before the meeting, but because Tarek Koff reran my chapter updated when they started talking about using depleted uranium again. But this was 1997, and they had studies. They studied that not only the veterans got sick, but their children, like the ones that came back from Vietnam that got depleted uranium illness. It went into their sperm, and it affected the next generation. Had terrible birth defects and horrible things happen. And they
that wasn't depleted uranium, though, Alice,
Yes.
in Vietnam, I don't think.
Iraq. It was Iraq.
Oh, okay. Iraq.
It was all about Iraq.
Okay.
And they did this whole thing because nobody knew this book, because it's still sold on Amazon and it has a bunch of articles.
Hold it up so we can screenshot.
Yeah. What's the name of it again, Alice?
Metal of Dishonor, METAL of Dishonor. And Ramsey Clark, who was Attorney General, he became very radical. You know, he was totally on our side. And he had the International Action Center published this.
Damacio was telling us earlier that he accompanied Ramsey Clark to Iraq.
I got on late. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, no, that was before most of us were on.
Oh.
Want to say more about that, Damacio?
I had been to Iraq and I had done some testing there the first time I went there with U.S. soldiers to the Highway of Death, and I guess he read about it somewhere. And his organization, I forget the name that he had. He had
International Action Center.
A National Action Center. They got a hold of me and asked and said that Ramsey Clark wanted to know if I would go with a group to Iraq, that he wanted to do some surveys for depleted uranium, and he heard that I had some knowledge of this, and I accepted that, his offer, and went to Iraq and went to the Highway of Death and did the testing. The only problem I had was when he asked me if I would go, I said I would, under one condition, and that was that I'd be able to take soil out of the country. I wanted to take the soil to laboratories outside of Iraq. And he said, okay, that the government gave permission to do that. And while I was out in the field gathering the samples and getting ready to take them out of the country and take them to at least 3 laboratories outside the country and have them tested, have them analyzed, Ramsey Clark come to me one day and he said, Iraq changed your mind. You can't take the samples out of the country.
Right. It was probably the U.S. that changed Iraq's mind.
Right. Yeah. I'm sure he thought it was okay when he said so. He was like such an guy. He was like.
Well, Damacio, this is all a great presentation, and obviously a lot of interest here in what you're sharing, and people are eager to learn more. But I think that, and I imagine we're going to not go too much longer, but I'm very interested, and I'm sure we all are, in this campaign you speak of to ban depleted uranium. I think that's something that would be probably a lot of Veterans for Peace members would be interested in. And I could also imagine Veterans for Peace, and there's several board members on this call, making a statement in the immediate future against the U.S. and the U.K. and Russia, for that matter, sending depleted uranium weapons into the war in Ukraine. So I think that we should stay in touch. I think there's a bunch of people on this call who would want to participate in a well-organized, well-conceived, well-organized campaign. And so maybe with that kind of forward thinking, we can have a few more comments from people in terms of what we would like to see happen in Veterans for Peace and beyond, in terms of addressing these various issues regarding depleted uranium. And Dan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to, we had a talk earlier today, and I was telling you about this documentary filmmaker who's actually doing a documentary on depleted uranium, or the effects of uranium exposure. And his name Daniel. I put it in. I actually put his name and stuff in the chat so people can look at it. But Daniel Everett Locke, who's a filmmaker, and he's trying to do some interviews with
Daniel,
people.
I'm sorry.
It's in the chat.
Yeah, look in the chat. You'll see it.
Okay.
And I has his website there. Excellent filmmaker and a great opportunity. So he'll be interviewing me, and one of our vets who's atomic vet who has seen over 30 explosions of testing of the atomic bomb, and has to have oxygen now all the time, almost 24/7. So yeah, and he's actually going around interviewing people, and I did put him in contact with Jerry, and I hope that the two of them will have a opportunity to talk about the Golden Rule here in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, we should put him in touch with Damacio too.
Yes,
Go ahead,
I think
Damacio.
so.
Damacio, and then Kara Bissell. I see you, but you'll be next.
Okay, I'd like to know more about this film producer. The reason I have is I was contacted by a Hollywood producer or from LA about a year ago, and they were interested in doing a film on this issue, and I had been writing a book, and I shortened that book to 24 pages, and thought, well, maybe what we can do is use this as the for a film. It's pretty well. This 24 pages will come out pretty soon, and then there's 3 pages that are going to be taken out of this 24 pages as a easy thing to get out to people. But this is.
So we have to make sure everybody's interested.
I have an interest in getting a film done. So speaking to this man might be useful to me.
Great. We'll put you in touch for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we got Kara and Peter up. Go ahead, Kara.
Thank you, Jerry. I just wanted to bring out the HR 77 that has 26 House of Representatives that have either sponsored or co-sponsored HR 77 that is in support of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And they're all Democrats. For the life of me, I can't understand why there aren't some Republicans that would denounce the use of any nuclear weapons under any circumstances. But so far, it's only Democrats. And my question is, wouldn't this be part of the ongoing call to not use depleted uranium? And it's all part of the same thing, isn't it?
I would have
Bill.
to look at the document to answer that. You know, I look for specific things that a treaty for depleted uranium would have, since I've been trying to write one up I've actually written a couple of them, but they didn't go too far. But I would have to look at HR 77 and see the language in it and see if
it's nothing about DU in there.
Doesn't have DU in there.
It's all
But maybe they would amend it. McGovern put it in. Maybe he'll fix it.
possibly.
maybe.
But so
Because they
far
talk
not.
about no first use and, deal learning and embrace the treaty. They don't say support it. They say to embrace the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons.
Basically, the back from the brink measures have been put into.
Yeah.
It's pretty comprehensive. It's a long, comprehensive bill, actually.
Well, maybe
and it does-
from the brink will take it on. I mean, they got a lot of money and publicity and power. Maybe they'll take, that's a step they might go for.
Well, Ira Halpin's been at the Golden Rules event in 3 different cities here in New England recently, so we could talk to him about that. Peter Barras, you're up.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. I think
Welcome
in the
back.
context of writing a message, it's important to be succinct as we can and not go on and on. For me, some convincing things is to use our own language from regulation and law. You heard me say about Department of Homeland Security and Nuclear Regulatory Commission considers DU a dirty bomb. What they also consider is whether by accident or intention, the use of the dirty bomb is a terrorist act. So when you put terrorist act and dirty bomb as the definition that applies to DU weapons, you've got a convincing message right there.
Thank you, Peter. The other Peter Barras wanted to speak as well.
Hi, Pete and repeat. I'm just, you know.
Oh, you already talked about a succinct message. I'm sorry.
Oh, me? No.
Okay.
I'm sitting here absorbing this and thinking, you know, what can I do? And I realize that I have some readers on Op-Ed News and I have a Substack coming up. Can you point me to some sources? Because I never read anywhere in diatribes against nukes and so forth. Nobody goes into details of what DU is. They just say it causes birth defects. It's terrible. But hearing what Damacio is talking about, it just puts a whole new color on it.
This book is on Amazon.
Yeah, I got a screenshot of that. Can anybody put things in the chat that I can get to
I
online?
put that in. I put the name of it and the publisher, and it's sold by Amazon
Right.
now.
And there are probably myriad other sources of
I
material.
don't think so. Nobody was really, but I don't know what that network is that Damacio
Well,
was.
this is why I'm asking the group.
The network for to ban uranium weapons, does that produce material? Do they have a website? There's a whole network about it, right, Damacio?
There is one particular organization, I think, that has had an advantage over others because of the length of time and the people who started this particular organization. It was in 2000. It's called the International Coalition to Ban Uranium Weapons. 14 of us met in Berlin, Belgium, back in 2000, and we put this organization together specifically to deal with the United Nations and deal with a ban. And they've done a very good job. And they've gotten, they have to be real careful about, what they say and not make mistakes. And I think sometimes that curtails them from actually pursuing what some of the realities are in this depleted uranium issue.
Well, I can get read by, maybe 1,000 people when I publish something, and it doesn't take me very long to write it. So if there are details anywhere that I can look up quickly, that would be helpful.
Could you put your email in the chat and I can send you?
Yeah, it's on my, I'll do that.
Okay, I see it is. It's there already.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of us would like to get access to further resources. So we've stimulated our our and our commitment to do something about it. So we will make sure that we share those through our No Nukes listserv from the Nuclear Abolition Working Group.
Be great. Jerry, are you on the boat?
Not on the boat at the moment. I'm in the support vehicle, which is a 20-foot long RV. It's kind of like a land boat.
I'm going to come and see you probably when you get to Albany.
Great, terrific. Damacio Lopez, I want to thank you for a really wonderful presentation and for all the research and work commitment you've made to this over the years. And I think that we all want to stay in touch and see how we can tie into this campaign and whether Veterans for Peace might decide to play a particular role in that. What do you think?
I think that's a good idea. And what I would like, since, I've talked about this global call to action that I've been talking about, this is my way, after all these 37 years, what do I turn to now? What can I possibly do that I've done before? I've seen things work that seen things happen that actually work. And this may be one of them. And what I would like to do is this. It's in a draft stage right now. I've been working on it for about 6 months. But what would be good is if I sent a copy to your organization and let you have an edit on this global call to action. It's called Global Call to Action to Stop the Use of Depleted Uranium Munitions, and it's not very long. Like I said, it's a short document, and then the stuff that I want going with it is this picture of the members of the Security Council, and also this picture, so people can know. It's a map of the sites where depleted uranium is tested, manufactured here in the United States. And I think that what I'd like is to have you look at the call to action and contribute to it, and look it over and see if that agrees with what you think is a good idea. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of ideas
I'm sure that some of us would be happy to take a look at it and comment.
I would like that very much.
Absolutely. Okay,
I will take that as a yes.
We will share that information with people here. I want to thank you again for getting the ball rolling here. I've been rolling for 30